Julie Andrews, beloved, graceful, always so composed, has finally said what fans have quietly suspected for over 50 years. Her connection with Christopher Plummer wasn't just acting. It wasn't just friendship. And it certainly wasn't forgettable. For decades, she stayed silent. She smiled through interviews. She gave polite answers. But behind that smile was something deeper, something unspoken. Now, after years of rumors, Julie has broken her silence. And what she's just revealed about Christopher Plummer has left fans stunned. Because after all this time, she's finally admitted the truth. It was always him. It began on a mountaintop in Salzburg in the spring of 1964. The hills were alive, the cast was assembled, and the cameras were rolling on what would become one of the most beloved films in history. But no one, not the director, not the studio, not even Julie Andrews herself, could have predicted what would happen when she met Christopher Plummer. Julie was already America's sweetheart. She'd just wrapped Mary Poppins and was still riding the wave of Disney perfection. He, on the other hand, was the outsider, a Canadian Shakespearean actor with a reputation for being intense, moody, and slightly difficult. On paper, they were opposites, but the moment they shared a scene, something changed. It was supposed to be professional, clean, classic Hollywood chemistry, but what unfolded during the filming of The Sound of Music was different. Cast members noticed it immediately. Julie and Christopher had an energy that couldn't be faked, a warmth that lingered even after cut was called, the kind of closeness that made the rest of the room feel like they were intruding. It started innocently, a shared laugh, long rehearsals, private conversations between takes, and then it deepened quietly, naturally, and without ever needing to be explained. Plummer would later say, "We became fast friends. There was a spark, a chemistry that didn't need to be acted." Julie called him a mischievous flirt, but said it with the kind of smile that holds 1,000 memories behind it. There were evenings at the hotel piano bar, sipping champagne and playing duets, long walks through the Austrian countryside, private jokes that no one else understood. And through it all, a closeness began to grow. Not loud, not scandalous, but unmistakable. Even the director, Robert Wise, admitted in later interviews that something real was happening between them, something that made every scene feel more authentic. Their performances showed it too. The way Captain Von Trapp looked at Maria during that iconic dance scene, the way her eyes softened when he walked into a room, it wasn't acting. Fans felt it in 1965, and they never stopped feeling it. But here's what most people didn't know. Both actors were navigating complicated personal lives. Julie was married to set designer Tony Walton. She had a young daughter waiting for her back home in England. Christopher was going through a rocky marriage himself, one that was already showing cracks but hadn't yet broken. So whatever they felt had to be held back. Julie once said in a much later interview, "It was all very proper, but it was there. Oh, it was there." They finished the film. They said their goodbyes, and they returned to their lives. But something had shifted, and it would linger for the next 50 years. Over time, the film became legend. And so did the question, what really happened between Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer? They'd reunite for interviews, public tributes, anniversary specials. And every time they appeared together, that old energy came flooding back. They'd laugh like old lovers, touch hands without even thinking, finish each other's sentences like no time had passed. People whispered, journalists asked, but neither of them gave a straight answer. Until now, because after decades of deflecting the question, Julie Andrews has finally admitted the truth. And it starts where it always started, with him. After The Sound of Music became a global sensation, Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer were no longer just actors. They were icons. Maria and the Captain, the perfect pair, the couple everyone rooted for on and off screen. But behind the smiles and polished interviews, there was something else. Distance. Life moved on. Julie returned to England, then to Hollywood, juggling motherhood and a skyrocketing career. She was now the face of family films, musicals, and elegance. She had a husband, a child, responsibilities. Christopher, meanwhile, leaned into more complex, often darker roles. He distanced himself from the sound of music in early years, calling it too saccharine, though he would later admit that was more about ego than truth. Deep down, he was proud of it. But perhaps more than anything, it reminded him of something unresolved. For fans, the chemistry never faded. Every rerun, every tribute, every red carpet reunion between the two reignited speculation. Were they ever together? Did they ever regret not being? But publicly, the answer was always the same. They were friends. Just friends. Dear friends. Nothing more. Julie Andrews, ever poised, would smile and deflect. "We had such a wonderful connection," she'd say. "But no, we were never romantically involved." And Christopher? His answers were more complicated. Over time, he softened. He began to speak more openly about their bond. "I was smitten with her," he admitted in an interview decades later. Absolutely smitten. When asked why they never explored it, he paused. And then, very gently, said, "Timing. Life. It just wasn't meant to happen." But that doesn't mean the feelings weren't there. He would later describe their connection as a platonic love story, one that never needed to be romantic to be real. And he wasn't wrong, because while they may have never been lovers, their affection was something far deeper than what most people experience in a lifetime. Friends noticed it. So did co-stars. Even Plummer's later wife once commented that when Julie walked into a room, Christopher's entire demeanor shifted. There was no jealousy, just understanding. It was Julie, always Julie, and for her part, Julie never revealed much. She was, and still is, a deeply private woman, but even she couldn't entirely hide it. At public events, when Plummer was beside her, she lit up. Not in a rehearsed red carpet sort of way, but in that natural, unconscious way people do when they're near someone who knows them completely. They'd touch hands and forget to let go. They'd laugh like it was still 1965. They'd tease, flirt, reminisce, like no one else existed in the room. The media kept asking, were they in love? Was there something more? The stories circulated. Whispers in magazines. Fan forums exploding every time they appeared together. Julie stayed graceful. Christopher grew more nostalgic. And the truth hovered between them like a curtain they never quite pulled back. Until now, because Julie Andrews has just said something she never dared say while he was alive. Something she kept guarded for over half a century. Something fans always suspected. And something that, once spoken, cannot be unheard. As the decades passed, Christopher Plummer's career only grew richer. Broadway triumphs, dramatic roles, an Oscar later in life. But no matter how far he traveled from that Austrian hillside, the sound of music followed him. In his early years, he resisted it. He dismissed the film as too sugary, even calling it the sound of mucus in interviews. But that was the armor talking. The sarcasm was a shield, a way to keep something private from becoming too public. Because behind that wit was a man carrying a quiet, unresolved emotion. Something he didn't want to cheapen by letting the world dissect it. Julie Andrews. Even when they weren't working together, she was still present. Constant. A reference point. A memory that aged more fondly with time. And when Christopher finally began to lower his defenses in later interviews, it was Julie he kept returning to. "She's as close to pure as anyone I've met," he said in one reflective sit-down. "And I've met a lot of people." When asked what their relationship had truly been, he hesitated. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he knew exactly what he couldn't say. "There was a temptation," he finally admitted. "A real one, but we were both married. And more than that, we respected each other too much to cross a line." Still, that line was blurred. Not in action, but in emotion. Christopher once described her presence on set as soothing and electric at the same time. He spoke of her voice, her elegance, the way she carried herself. "There was always light around her," he said, "even in silence." And that silence, in many ways, became their language. They didn't need declarations. They didn't need grand gestures. Their affection was built in the quiet, between takes, in sideways glances, in a laugh shared just out of frame. But it wasn't all gentle. There was ache too. In the margins of his autobiography, In Spite of Myself, Christopher never directly claims he was in love with Julie. But the phrasing is careful, loving, protective, and yet there are clues, moments where the words almost slip through. He describes her as a dazzling woman, a soul of rare beauty, and the heart of our film. And then he adds something that feels like a whisper not meant for print. I was grateful to have her there. Always. It's that word, always, that returns again and again when he speaks of her. Because what they had wasn't fleeting. It didn't belong to a few weeks of filming in 1964. It stretched across decades, across marriages, across continents and careers. Even as both moved on with life, there was something in Christopher that remained tethered. At public events, when the two reunited, it was as if no time had passed. He would kiss her hand. She would rest her head on his shoulder. They'd smile in ways that said more than any interview ever could. One year, during a tribute to The Sound of Music, a reporter asked if he ever imagined a life where he and Julie had been together. Christopher smiled. It was a sad smile, the kind that comes from a place of memory, not imagination. I suppose I did, he said. Once, maybe more than once. But it wouldn't have worked. That's the beautiful tragedy of it, I guess. Then, more softly, he added, but she'll always be something very special. And perhaps most telling of all, during his final public appearances, when asked what project meant the most to him, after a lifetime of films, awards, and accolades, he didn't mention his Oscar-winning role in Beginners. He didn't talk about Shakespeare or his stage triumphs. He said The Sound of Music. Because, as he explained, that film gave me Julie. It's only in hindsight that fans can see the full arc. The love wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It wasn't even spoken in so many words. But it was there, in every smile, every tribute, every time his voice trembled when her name was mentioned. He may never have told her everything, but he didn't need to. And now, with Christopher gone, only Julie remains to speak for what was left unsaid. And what she's about to reveal next is what fans have waited decades to hear. For most of her life, Julie Andrews kept her private world wrapped in silk. She was gracious, measured, and always in control of her words, especially when it came to Christopher Plummer. She would praise him in interviews, call him a dear friend, speak of their shared laughter and enduring bond. But she never gave the public more than a careful sliver. Even when interviewers pressed, her smile never wavered. No, she'd say gently, we were never a couple, just very good friends. But those who watched closely, those who truly listened, could sense something behind her eyes. Something deeper than friendship. Something that had lingered quietly through 5 decades of red carpets, tributes, and reunions. And then, in 2021, the silence cracked. When Christopher Plummer passed away, Julie Andrews was devastated. The statement she released was brief, just a few lines. But beneath every word was grief that couldn't be softened. I've lost a friend, she said, a constant in my life. He was my film partner, my confidant, my dear companion through time. But it wasn't until later, during a quiet interview for a British tribute special, that Julie said something she had never said before. The interviewer, gently navigating through her memories of The Sound of Music, asked if it was difficult watching clips of her and Christopher now that he was gone. Julie looked down, paused, and for the first time in over 50 years, she let her guard drop. It's difficult, she said, her voice soft, because I see so much of what wasn't said. The room grew still. She continued, he was a part of me always. We shared something very rare. It didn't need to be spoken, but it was there. Then came the words that changed everything. Sometimes, she said, you don't realize until much later that it was always them. From the very beginning. The interviewer didn't interrupt. Julie blinked, looked away for a moment, and added, almost under her breath, it was always him. Not Captain Von Trapp. Not my co-star. Not a dear friend. Him. There was no follow-up. No elaboration. The moment passed as quickly as it came. But the internet didn't miss it. Fans around the world caught it instantly. Clips circulated. Headlines bloomed. Julie Andrews finally confirms what fans always suspected. And just like that, 50 years of restraint unraveled in a single sentence. It didn't matter that they never dated. It didn't matter that they never kissed off-screen or lived some public fairy tale. Because what she admitted was more powerful than any romance novel. That somewhere deep inside, quietly and respectfully, she loved him. Not in the way tabloids print, but in the way a heart remembers someone who changed everything and never quite left. And maybe that's why she never said it before, because she didn't want to share that part of him with the world. Not until he was gone. Not until the weight of all those years finally pressed too hard on her chest. And when it did, she gave us the one truth that had always been waiting. It was always him. Julie Andrews' quiet confession, just 5 words, wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it changed everything. It was always him. After years of smiling through questions, of dancing around the truth with grace and deflection, Julie had finally said what fans had long believed. But the heartbreak didn't come just from her words. It came from the timing. Because by the time she could say it out loud, Christopher Plummer was already gone. There would be no phone call, no shared smile backstage, no bittersweet, "I always knew," just silence. And Julie, as poised as she's always been, was left to carry the weight of what might have been. That's the part that broke people. For all the elegance and affection they showed the world, what fans now realize is that Julie and Christopher shared something far more complicated than a missed romance. They shared a love without a home. It wasn't nurtured in a marriage. It didn't unfold on dinner dates or vacations. It was carried, quietly, through decades of life, through other relationships, children, career highs and lows. It existed in glances, in handshakes held too long, in unsent letters and words half-spoken. And for Julie, that burden must have been heavy, because love without closure doesn't go away. It settles somewhere deeper. It waits. Maybe that's why she never said it during his lifetime. Because to speak it would be to open a door they'd both worked hard to keep closed. They had both made choices, ones that kept their bond intact but undefined. And once you define something, it changes. It risks the comfort, the consistency, the safety. They were each other's anchor, but always from just enough distance. Julie once described Christopher as my partner in mischief, but you could hear the ache in her voice when she added, he was the one I could always count on, always. And now that he's no longer there, the truth rushes in with nowhere to go. She's said it, finally, but all that's left is memory. Photos of them laughing at press events, clips of them finishing each other's sentences on stage. That moment at the 2002 reunion where she looked at him like she was still 29. Or the 45th anniversary of The Sound of Music, where he kissed her hand and whispered something only she could hear, her face flushing with quiet joy. Those moments live on. But the man who created them with her does not. And in that loss, Julie isn't just mourning a friend. She's mourning what was never allowed to be. Not because they didn't care. Not because they didn't want it. But because sometimes life just gets in the way. Timing, commitments, the roles we're expected to play. And Julie Andrews, always the picture of composure, did what was expected. Until she couldn't anymore. Until she finally let the truth surface. And when she did, it wasn't for publicity. It wasn't for the press. It was for him. A message, whispered too late, but whispered nonetheless. Because some truths don't fade with time. They only grow louder in silence. And Julie's silence, after 50 years, finally gave way to something real. A quiet heartbreak. A timeless love. A truth she kept buried until it could no longer stay hidden. It was always him. For fans who grew up watching The Sound of Music, Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer weren't just characters in a film. They were the embodiment of grace, romance, and something that felt honest. Their story was never messy, never tabloid fodder, never publicly broken or repaired. Simply was timeless, unspoken, and unwavering. And now, After half a century of wondering, speculating, and hoping, Julie has finally let the curtain fall. Just a little. Not with drama, not with regret, but with honesty. When she said it was always him, she wasn't rewriting history. She wasn't confessing to a hidden affair or rewriting their friendship as something it never was. She was telling us what we'd always felt, but could never prove, that somewhere, deep in her heart, he had always been the one. Not in a romantic fantasy, not in the way a love story typically ends, but in the quiet, enduring way that matters more. A soul connection, a shared rhythm, a presence that never left her side, even when he wasn't in the room. It's no wonder she struggled to say it until now. Some truths don't fit neatly into interviews or memoirs. Some feelings are too sacred to share while the other person is still living, breathing, reading, listening. But after Christopher's passing, something shifted in her. Perhaps the weight became too heavy. Perhaps she realized that silence doesn't protect us. It isolates us. Or maybe she simply missed him too much to keep pretending it was all just friendship. Whatever the reason, that one sentence changed everything. And in doing so, Julie gave us more than a glimpse into her past. She gave us permission to feel our own quiet heartbreaks, to revisit the almosts in our lives, the people who passed through like a breeze but stayed in our hearts like thunder. Because that's what Christopher Plummer was to Julie Andrews. Not a brief spark, not a fling. He was the storm she never stepped into, but never stopped watching from the window. She has continued on, of course. She always does. Julie is 88 now, still elegant, still gracious, still protecting what little privacy she has left. But when she speaks of him now, there's something different. A softness, a stillness, as if part of her still walks those Austrian hills, turns around, and sees him waiting. And while she may never say his name with tears in her eyes, her words said everything. It was always him. A statement that doesn't demand explanation. Because some love stories don't need closure. Some aren't meant to be tied with a ribbon and filed away as finished. Some are meant to linger, to haunt, to soften, to remind us of the people who changed us, even if we never got to tell them. And in that single, trembling sentence, Julie Andrews did something rare. She gave Christopher Plummer a gift, a truth, a thank you, a quiet echo from across the years. And she gave us, her audience, the final piece of a story we've held close since 1965. Because no matter what history books say, no matter what interviews try to define, this love was real. It was restrained. It was respectful. And it lasted far longer than anyone ever knew. Julie Andrews didn't need to act on it. She simply needed to feel it. And now, at last, she's let us feel it too. Because it was always him. For more of the latest news, check out this video.